Well, Michael, it's been too long. Great to be back together. How are things in your world?
They're as bad as everywhere, I guess, or as good as somewhere. But this gap has is things aren't improving, but there seems to be some push that something's got to give. So we're poised to wanting to work with combinations of people.
Well, look, here we are in the last quarter of 2023, a year you described as a hopeful year of rebound. And together over the last little while, you and I have been exploring over 50 years of thinking and probing and work on the ground with practitioners and trying to make sense of some of those core ideas and actually surprisingly, perhaps, or maybe unsurprisingly, seeing incredible through lines through the type of thinking that is still going to be very, very useful for us to close out 2023 and then to begin to navigate 2024. You sent me in a couple of months ago a terrific paper I've got here, a 1972 paper, your analysis of the overview of innovative process and the user. And, Michael, right at the core of your thesis there is this idea that for too long, schools have been handed innovations that have been developed outside of them and then told to implement them. And in 1972, you were making a really clear case to say that the users themselves need to be deeply involved in the problem definition and then need to collaborate in their context to actually generate, develop, and spread kind of innovations that really work. Uh, it's incredible. Tell me, where do you see even through lines now into the kind of conversations you're having to that kind of core insight of we've got to stop doing things to schools and we've got to start activating at the very core the users, whether it be students, teachers, school leaders, etc., as key agents in the work?
Well, that was the beginning, not only just because I was at the beginning, but also the term implementation never came into use until I would say 1968. And I was in there with the Frontier, Seymour Saris and Neil Gross and others that first started to look at that and said
Yes.
implementation is not happening. So it was completely, just a kind of a tabula rasa in terms of any actual strategizing. So we
Mm.
opened the door on the strategizing then, on
Yes.
the right track, but it never really stuck because it wasn't the society wasn't focused enough on what the problems were. Increasingly, we have the problems that are now so much in your face that can't be ignored. So this is a new era altogether. Still not the right solution, but that's why we're talking today. Will it be different? We called this year the year of the rebound.
Yeah.
Things did interfered with the rebound. It was stopped in its bounce. So I still think that 2024 is now. I see more policy and triple level attention. Now the triple level is paying attention,
Okay.
and so that wasn't the case back then.
Well, look, as we think about this transition to, hopefully a more hopeful 2024 of meaningful change and work, I want to pick up a thread that's been in your writing and thinking for about, 12, 15 years. And this is this idea of drivers, both when we're thinking about getting to better educational futures, leading change. You started to play around with this concept of drivers. And I think it was around 2011, you released a paper with the Center for Strategic Education, and you were sort of setting up this frame of we've been choosing the wrong drivers for educational change. I thought I might come back and what's this notion of drivers to you, and why is it so important to sort of really make explicit what are the drivers that are the kind of core of the strategy or how we're at least orientating ourselves as we're engaging in the work?
Yeah, that came about, one could say, that paper that I did for
Mm.
CSC came about almost accidentally in historical terms. But during that period, 2003 onward, we did the Ontario strategy. I
Yeah.
started to do workshops, 3 weeks at a time, 15 workshops in the UK and the Republic of Ireland and around the US. And so that I was really immersed in those. And I just finished or was in the midst of a series that this one was in Melbourne. And when I sat down afterwards,
Yes.
This was 2010, let's say, not that when the paper came out. We had a discussion with Tony McKay and a couple of other people. They said, "Oh, this workshop is really hitting home. What's the turnkey here?" And I said, "Well, it's the drivers." And it was just a word that came out of the conversation. Like a lot of the good ideas, they come out of practice. If you're close enough to practice and you're doing it systematically, and you think you are getting glimpses, and it starts to make sense. So I did do the wrong drivers. The right drivers were there, but the emphasis was, look, this is wrong. And
Yeah.
we didn't use the word viral there, but it kind of went viral in those days that people really knew that that was the truth. And so that opened up a great amount of energy and other things. It still was not the solution, but the driver is a policy or action that's
Yes.
intended to cause something. Usually you could tending to cause something positively, but lo and behold, I identify the negative drivers, and the best way of putting them now, I didn't say it then, is these were drivers that were detached from, like, if you think of a driver as a steering thing
Yeah.
and a steering wheel, it was detached from the rest of the car or
Oh, I love that.
that.
Yes.
And
And no
so
connection.
it floated, the policies floated around in a detached fashion, where people pretended that they were happening, and they
Yes.
weren't. So I never thought of detached until recently, but that's
That's helpful.
exactly what a driver that's not attached to the full action is like in the driveway going nowhere.
Yeah, I love this. And back in 2011, you were talking about things, the detached driver, that which is not connected to any power moving forward, was an overemphasis on accountability compared to
Yeah.
capacity building, saying an overemphasis on individual teacher quality, individual school leader quality. We've got to get the individuals to do better. And you said, no, this is group work. This is actually about group quality, collective work. You were saying an overemphasis on technology being a savior rather than an enabler. And we've got to actually get to the core of sort of really thinking about quality teaching instruction. And then something that I think is unbelievably relevant now is this nature of being fragmented and isolated work versus systemic work that is glued together and knitted together so it becomes some collective social action. So
Yeah.
there were some frames back 12 years ago or so. And as you say, you named things and gave a really clear framework for people to say, yeah, we are pursuing change through these drivers that you were naming and articulating the evidence to say, well, actually, I think these are unproductive. They're wrong drivers. You say they're detached. And look, over the last year or so, you've been starting to pull together some updated thinking about drivers, and drivers that don't get right down to the precision of what people should do, but kind of create this orienting framework to ensure that we're in the right space doing the right kind of work. So can we take us now into, can I take us now into the sort of updated drivers? And I thought maybe we can do a little stop tour through the 4 drivers, and then we might be able to dig in together around the benefit
Right.
of using these as a conceptual frame or as an orientating framework. So the first one you now name as well-being and learning. Tell me about why you want to put this as one of your big 4 drivers in how people should be framing up where we're going next.
Yeah, I want to make an interim step into that question just for a moment. In the
Sure.
2011 paper, the people that were on the receiving end of the wrong drivers knew I was exactly right. The people
Yes.
that were on the delivery end never thought of themselves as having wrong drivers. They just thought they needed to reinforce them somehow. So what's important to notice there is, and I put it in one of my recent slides, the reason the center doesn't get better is that they failed, but they don't know why they failed because they don't study why they failed. So they never correct it. So that you've got a center that is not learning, and then you have a decade, the 2010 till 2020, which I'm going to say is one of the worst decades we've had for the fact, the inequality increased, the money got that got consolidated at the top rich, all of that. And there was never anything that was happening that was strong enough. So I'm going to say it's almost a lost decade. It doesn't mean individuals weren't doing things, but in terms of us learning something, it was a lost decade. And so what I did with the drivers 2024 now, or 2023, which is the book on drivers that I did with Joanne Quinn, we caught up to the lost decades lessons. And that's what these drivers are. The lessons made explicit in 2023 that were not made explicit in 2011. And the first one is well-being and learning, which is now the obsession with academics, the things that distorted learning to the point where 80% of students don't find schooling very much relevant to themselves now. And even those that do well, they're called sometimes the wounded warriors, or the wounded winners is the word actually. So the wounded winners, they're okay in the system, but they know it's not meaningful. It's not what life should be. It's not where the world should be. So anyway, well-being, introducing well-being is important. And then we've also increased learning to delve deeply into the 6 C's, the global competencies, into the new pedagogy, which increases the powerful partnership between students and teachers when it's done well, the community involvement. That's all part of a better learning strategy. And because the well-being, we know from neuroscience and other things that if you don't pay attention to that, the whole thing collapses. So well-being feeds learning. Learning can feed well-being. And now we've got it as driver number 1.
All right. So by the way, I really love this framing around almost you and Joanna learning on behalf of the systems that didn't learn the lessons over that decade. And now this is sort of the synthesis of the lessons that played out in that decade, but actually because policymakers kept often, by the way, changing over at a much quicker rate, no one was still in the seat long enough to even see that some of the things they were implementing had no traction at all. So this first one around well-being and learning, I definitely think, Michael, we're seeing a tendency towards that across a lot of the systems that you and I are engaging in, and potentially, particularly becoming even more explicit in the COVID period, where people started to say, actually, we've got to not just have well-being somehow as an enabler on the edge, but right at the core of what we're trying to achieve in school. So well-being and learning. All right, let's take us to the next driver. You call it social and machine intelligence. Tell us, what are you playing with in this area? How does this driver help us orientate in the right way?
Well, as we make the transition to driver number 2, I want to say that a certain number of the solutions are treating well-being and learning as 2 separate pieces. And so the real driver is the synthesis of those 2. That's how we get to number 2. And then as we were writing this book, the social intelligence, artificial intelligence, that came in November 2022 is when we were writing these chapters. And all of a sudden, artificial intelligence was going to kill the world or save the world, usually kill the world. So we immediately, I was already, in a sense, dissatisfied with the presence and power of collaboration among teachers and students, and thought that there was too vague a concept. Some of it was great and we liked it, but it wasn't powerful enough. So I started to use connected autonomy. Then now, and here's where I want to make the point: the systems that were on the right track in 2022, 2023. Anaheim Unified High School District, Anaheim Union High School District, we work with in California, Ottawa Catholic District, 83 schools, we work with Ontario. They immediately saw that artificial intelligence had to be employed in the service of driver 1 immediately. And we're right actually now in the midst of helping make that happen. And it turns out one of our, and Andy and I think had this phrase earlier, when you've got something powerful, and it can be powerfully bad or good, you better move towards the danger, not wait for it to play out its energy or use its energy. So we're proactive now with Anaheim, with Ottawa, and others like that, and actually got a very good formulation that I've been presenting that says, it says that you can actually further the well-being learning agenda if you position artificial intelligence to do something that to be part of this solution. And I want to use just a simple example, just almost a snippet. and Anaheim, where this is really, they jumped on it because, and incidentally, Anaheim case study is in the driver's book. They, I was interviewing the lead teacher who's in artificial intelligence and the integration of learning, and he said, what I did last week, we were working on they have 5 C's because they collapsed the fifth and sixth one. And we had a student with students and ourselves are processing the artificial intelligence. A student produced a short paper on creativity. Her paper was like, this is what creativity. And then what we did is we fed it into artificial intelligence and asked them to grade the paper. Asked the machine to grade the paper. So then the grade came back. It was described. There's elements. It comes back in about I don't know, 3 minutes actually. So they sat down and they began to pick up. Well, they learned from that interaction where the personal creativity, the machine processing that instantly, and a bunch of students saying, "Wow, this is like, what do I know about creativity now?" So that's a simple example, but this is happening a mile a minute now in Anaheim, and they're just moved towards the danger. We've got a big conference coming up March 1st and 2nd to pull up together, but this is figuring out how do you blunt the negative part of artificial intelligence? How do you start to use the positive? And some of it can be used to free up the time of students and teachers to work together much more on what we call the shared humanity paradigm.
Nice. Yeah, it's a really good grounded example there of how that could look. And I do love this idea of actually walking into the danger, not blindly, handing out the technology in thoughtless ways, but making sure schools and districts and regions and countries are actually leaning in and exploring what this can look like and how do we use it productively. But you can't do it, obviously, without that broader view of, say, the human development, human learning, human relationships. And once you have those things, you can go looking for ways that this could be leveraged. So I really love that example. I love it as well. I was talking to a principal just last night who was saying that, thinking about where you add the artificial intelligence. And I think that example is a terrific one because the student was the ideator. The student generated and really drew on in their own uniqueness, what is my view around creativity, and then uses the AI to mark and give feedback. It's very different to saying, oh, let me just start off, what does the AI think about creativity, and straight away limiting the boundaries of what they might write about or think about from what is being generated. So it's really interesting as well when you draw on these approaches and in what stage of a learning process is it going to best support, and when might it actually end up dampening curiosity, when might it dampen kind of agency. Yeah, great. And okay, anything else?
There's one other, the intersection of driver 1 and driver 2, I just want to mention that the big problem with schooling, and this is what we're working on now, is that the teaching profession is ill-placed in terms of the kind of culture and structure that would enable them to be good enough individually and collectively, and therefore the students are ill-placed to do that. So we are now working on, and this is not just artificial intelligence, but the whole thing where you say, how could teachers have systematic time and students individually and together in the normal schedule? Let's say you have 3 days of some focus work, and day 4 is organized for them to learn among themselves, and that's the common schedule. It's restructured, it's recultured. And so our work now in the teaching profession, we have to get to the point where teachers stop thinking closing the classroom door is my best defense, and they start thinking, if I start to work different with other teachers and other students, and we're the force for change, and it's transparent, that's the shift. And everybody is now missing the point. What teachers are offered are not the intrinsic kind of sense they have about this offer doesn't feel right to me. Oh yeah, pay, we need more pay, but that's a hygiene factor, as we call it. It's not an intrinsic motivator. The intrinsic motivator is, how do I get better with my job? And some teachers are cynical, so that's got to be taken care of. But I see this as transformation of the culture and the structure of the school when driver 1 and driver 2 intersect.
Yeah, really well put. And I suppose when we go back to when we were talking about why the wrong drivers don't actually connect is that they often aren't connecting, are they, to those intrinsic motivators, the sense of I want to contribute, I want to have agency, I
Yeah.
want to work with others around work that matters, I want to feel like we're moving forward together.
Yeah.
Really, really useful point. All right, shall
Yeah.
we move to driver three? Anything else you want to mention here
Uh,
on one and two?
no, they're cumulative, obviously, and they interact on that. And driver 3 and 4, they start to get like macro. So I want to think the foundation is 1 and 2. Those are the foundation. Make sure that they are that strong. And the equity and equity investments, it really is a conundrum because over the last since 1980, the economic discrepancy between the low and the high in every analysis in the world has got bigger and bigger and bigger, greater, and that the equity, even the equity agenda, when it gets money, it ends up being squandered because it's money kind of thrown into the wrong system. So what I do think part of it is making sure that the investments are in equity. It turns out that students are motivated by two things these days: the collapse of the climate and the collapse of how we treat each other, the trust, social relations. Those are the twin towers. I call them the twin towers of inhumanity. And they are beginning to, in our good work, intersect that we can, if we intersect those two, we will deal with equity in a natural way. And that's that because it's explicit and the power is there to make the difference. So I want 1 and 2 to be foundation. Then I want 3 to figure out how do you start investing more into this. And it's a struggle, but it's amazing in one way. I would like to give examples. Last week I was in Vista, which is a district in California. We were looking 0 to 5 age. They had classes where kids were starting at age 2. They had three adults or 1 adult per 3 students, and they were in clusters of 12. The parents of the children in that class had to have a job or be working on a job in order for the child to be placed. The system helped them get that job. So all of a sudden you see food, 3 meals a day, shelter, safety, job out of the way of poverty, learning, all in that same for those students that are between 2 and, in this case, 5. They call the program P to 3, so it's prenatal through grade 3. So it's where the action has to be, and it really is the equity investments coming to help everybody. That when investment doesn't help just those that are doing poorly, it actually helps everyone. And when you combine the first 3 drivers, that's what that happens. That happens.
Yeah, I like it. All right, take us into driver 4, systemness. This is, I think, the only driver that sort of is still there from the 2011 paper in the same sort of articulation, that movement from fragmented to systemness. And I guess it's connected as well to the middle part of your model here, which is all about ongoing coherence making. So, how do you want us to think about the notion of systemness as we head into this next phase?
Well, I think when the 2011 paper treated it as objectively, how do we get the system coordinated, connected so that there's coherence? Now we treat it subjectively. That coherence, that systemness is the degree to which people at each of the 3 levels, if we simplify local, middle, and top, that there's an increase in the percentage of people in all 3 levels who are aware we're part of a bigger system. It's not quite right. We've got responsibility to think about it, to do something about it. And I have to say, without question, that students, because of the circumstances of the last 10 years, the last 3 years, the last 1 year, are way more aware of the system than they ever were. And what we have now in our solution is students as change leaders, along with teachers and schools. And those change leaders have 2 qualities, and they come to it naturally pretty readily once they get going, is that they want to be, they're being prepared for society, and they're being prepared in society. So the in society is, how do I cope as an individual. For society is how do we team up to change society. So it's coming together. There's a lot of glue among the drivers now, and they start to get more coherent, I think, in reality, as well as being able to capture them and cause them to be stronger.
So how should we think about drivers? We've got these four, as you've said, that increasingly, as you've spoken about them, you sort of are moving fluidly between them. So we've got well-being and learning, we've got artificial and social intelligence, we've got equity and equality investments, and we've got systemness. Um, how do we use these as school mid-level or policy leaders to sort of orient ourselves in the right ways?
Well, they are a system. A driver is a force that is going to do something. So the four drivers are a system of forces that are interrelated, that are powerful, especially when they're interrelated, but powerful even in their own right, one by one. So
Nice.
how we think about them then is mobilizing those drivers in an interconnected mega system. And that
Mm.
where we see that possible now, I think, and I've in the book on the drivers, I flip the system and say, build the bottom, invest in the bottom, build the middle, and intrigue the top is where I put it. Because the top has been interested for the wrong reasons. It's just a turnover at the top of policies that go nowhere. So if I start to put the pressure collectively on the
Yes.
bottom getting better, because now within a school, it's across schools, it's across, it includes community schools, by the way. So the bottom is getting mobilized. They've got a lot of reasons why they want to be and need to be. And then the middle it depends on the structure, obviously. Different countries have different combinations. But the middle, the principal book I did, Principle 2.0,
Yes.
says the main job of the principal is develop the local system. The local system is the community and the school. Therefore, the main job of the middle is to help develop the local system.
Absolutely.
And that comes. So I think we're getting that. And then intrigue the top. I bet that because of the problems, because of the exposure of 50 years of failure, I bet there are some political leaders at the top who must think we should do this differently. But I'm not going to wait for them to join the drivers. One might come pick them up on the roadside if they're hitchhiking or something. That could be part of this, but they better come a little more humbly. They better come, and when they do it the right way, they'll be heroes too. So there's a real chance for the political development. I was talking with one of the people I advised at the level of a politician 2 weeks ago, and he said the problem with because of the lack of leadership, the problem with attracting leaders is that the political capital, and no matter what they do, is a sinkhole. In other words, he said, how are they going to have political capital when it's not at all clear how to do this? So they're backing off because their interest, some of them, in moral purpose, spiritual, we call spirit work. But I must say, compared to our literacy, numeracy, high school, graduation, that the current agenda is much more complex and literally is a sinkhole for politicians of getting political capital, which is really what they want to have spiritual satisfaction, but they need to have political capital to be to survive. So that's in the meantime, I want them to be intrigued while we build up the bottom and the middle, and then the top is implicated.
Really, really well put. Well, Michael, thank you. And there's some ways Principle 2.0 and this updated four drivers is a really nice synthesis of much of your thinking over the last 10 years. And I really enjoy the way that you're sort of saying it's all interconnected now. It's not so easy just to pull out individual drivers or levers, that actually, as you talk about one, it's connected to the other, and it's interdependent on other bits. And I think they're definitely moving towards a view that's holistic and has human development, learning, and well-being right at the core. That is in all your work. It always taps into those fundamental motivators of humans, doing work that matters, working on the right things, working together, being in a culture that's moving forward. And I've got to say, you and I were chatting before we press record about this just general sense of a systemic exhaustion of the profession.
Mhm.
And there are many solutions that may be beneficial, as we've said. There's some elements around proper and appropriate pay. There's elements around reduction of workload. But I also would suggest that what you're offering here is one pathway forward to support and re-energize an exhausted profession is helping them do the kind of work that matters, do it in a way that's energizing, and to feel again that they have some agency and that they can move forward, as opposed to being simple implementers of poor drivers being dropped down from above. So I do think that what we're talking about here is an energizing agenda, and it's also part of the agenda we need if we're going to keep getting our wonderful educators and leaders to keep leaning into the work.
Well, to use a poor analogy, the rubber's going to hit the road for the drivers in the next 3 years. So it's going to be a question mark as to whether something can be accomplished. But now at least we are more prepared to know what doesn't work, get in there and get some examples. It's always good examples that really make a difference for us. So let's see what we can create in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, Michael, that might be a good point to pause this conversation and in some ways pause our large-scale sweep of the history of a lot of your thinking and work. What I'm hoping is when we touch base again, we can start to explore exactly what you just mentioned, which is where are we seeing emergent examples across the multiple systems that you're in and partnering with? And as we look towards 2024, I think it would be terrific to catch up again, but to then start to think less about your historical work and a little bit more about where are we seeing these practice examples emerge? Where are those positive proof points? And how can we learn from those and work out ways to spread it further? So, Michael, as always, great to catch up. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you for helping to chronicle some of it. It's great to talk to you.
Been great fun.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.